Good morning. It's always good to see a full house here for this event. My name is Eric Leonard, and I'm serving as the acting superintendent at Andersonville National Historic Site this summer. And on behalf of the park, the Friends of Andersonville, and Georgia Southwestern State University, I want to welcome you to this year's POW MIA Convocation. This Friday is National POW MIA Recognition Day, in which we honor those Americans held as prisoners of war and those who are still missing in action. We do this here because 10 miles away in Andersonville is located the site of the most famous, deadliest military prison of the American Civil War. The nearly 13,000 American soldiers who perished there vividly demonstrate the risks associated with captivity. Today, Andersonville has become a place to honor all Americans held as prisoners of war and explore their individual stories, something we'll do this morning. Joining us today is Colonel Wayne Waddell, Cemetery Administrator Kim Robbins, who oversees the honorable burial of veterans in the Andersonville National Cemetery, will serve as moderator. Before we begin, State Representative Mike Chiokis has a brief presentation.
Thank you. Eric, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Good morning. Good morning. It's an honor for me to be here, and it's an even bigger honor for me to be in the presence of a true American hero. When I found out about this event, I had a resolution drawn up at the Capitol and recognizing Colonel Waddell for his service to our nation. On a personal note, I want to share just a brief experience. My father served in the Air Force during the Second World War and was a right waist gunner on a B-17. And when his airplane was shot down, he narrowly escaped to capture the resistance in Belgium, where he was shot down, picked him up and the other crew members and took them to safety. Unfortunately, Colonel Waddell didn't have that same luck. And at this point, I'd like to read the resolution. And this is a resolution by the Georgia House of Representatives recognizing and commending Colonel Wayne Waddell and for other purposes. Whereas Colonel Wayne Waddell was born in Bremen, Georgia on September 12, 1935, and was an outstanding student and graduate of Georgia Institute of Technology. Whereas he worked at Lockheed Aircraft Company until reporting to active duty and flight training in 1957. Whereas his flight training included being one of the first to fly the T-37s. He successfully received his Silver Wings on September 3rd, 1958, and later became a flight instructor and attended the University of Southern California, where he obtained a master's degree in business in 1966, and went on to graduate from Survival School and Jungle Survival School. This true American hero arrived in Thailand on April 1967, and he was on his 47th mission over North Vietnam when he was tragically shot down on July 5th, 1967. His plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and he was barely able to evacuate the plane in time. Colonel Waddell was captured and taken to the infamous Hanoi Hilton, where he was held for 6 grueling years by the North Vietnamese. 6 years. Whereas with great faith, perseverance, and true strength of character, Colonel Waddell survived his cruel imprisonment and was released on March 4th, 1973. Whereas Friday, September 19th, 2014 is National Prisoner of War Missing in Action Recognition Day, in honor of the many POW MIAs who have served their country proudly and their friends and families who have anxiously awaited their return with heavy and hopeful hearts. The National Park Service, Friends of Andersonville, and Georgia Southwestern State University are hosting a 2014 National POW MIA Convocation, whereas Colonel Waddell will serve as the event's featured speaker. This annual Ride Home event will host ceremonies to remember the military service members still missing in action and to honor former prisoners of war for their tremendous sacrifices. All Americans owe a debt of gratitude to Colonel Wayne Waddell and the many men and women in the United States Armed Forces who risked their lives in the defense of freedom and to secure the blessings of liberty for this nation and for other peoples of the world. The focus of the POW MIA Recognition Day is to ensure that America remembers its responsibility to stand behind those who serve our nation and do everything possible to account for those who did not return. Whereas it is the most appropriate that the brave and courageous men and women of the nation's military who have not returned home and who suffered as prisoners of war be recognized, remembered, and honored. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Colonel Wayne Waddell, U.S. Air Force retired, is hereby recognized, commended for his willingness to make sacrifices for his fellow Americans and extend heartfelt gratitude for the many trials and tribulations he endured for the preservation of freedom. Thank you, Colonel.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, Colonel Waddell, you and I have known each other personally for 8 years, maybe a little bit more. Is it okay if I just call you Wayne?
Sure is.
Good deal, because that would be really awkward. Tell me about where you grew up. I know you're a Georgia boy, and how you found yourself at Georgia Tech.
Well, I grew up in Bremen, Georgia, as mentioned there. Had a neighbor who was a ham radio operator, and he convinced me that the future in this world was to be an electrical engineer and graduate from Georgia Tech. So I managed to get in over there and shortly found out I was already learned more electrical engineering than I wanted to know. But despite the director's worst fears, I managed to graduate and took Air Force ROTC and went in the Air Force and found my place.
Okay. Every pilot that I have ever met has always said when they were a little boy, all they wanted to do was fly. Was that the case with you growing up?
Pretty much. I grew up during World War II, the impressionable years, and the gentleman down here who was the German POW was with some of the people that I heard about those big airplane raids in Europe and the Flying Tigers in China. I thought I wanted to do that too, and luckily Air Force let me do it.
Is that why you went into the Air Force, or
Yep.
did you have a lifelong goal of joining the Air Force?
Well, I really didn't think I'd get to do it, but when I got to Tech and found out that you had to take ROTC for 2 years, and I got in the Air Force, I decided to stick with it, and then they determined that I could fly.
Okay, you were shot down on your 47th mission. So tell me about that day. What mission were you on? What was, the plan of attack, so to speak?
Well, that day was kind of a different mission. We'd been hitting some pretty good targets in North Vietnam, the steel mills and the the supply centers. We'd hit fuel dumps. That day we were scheduled to hit 2 little innocuous railroad sidings up on the railroad between Hanoi and China. The unfortunate part was that to get to them, we had to go up and roll in right over what we considered the best gun site in North Vietnam. They could reach up to 20,000 feet easily with their big guns and out 18 to 20 miles. And the railroad siding I was on, we rolled in right on top of them. They got 3 out of the 16 of us. And as it turns out, I was the only one that survived.
What were your initial thoughts when you realized you were captured?
Oh, before or when I was captured?
When you were captured? Once
Oh.
you knew you were in the hands of the enemy?
Well, the reason that I clarified, when I first came down, as was mentioned there, I just barely got out of the airplane, and I was sitting on a log looking down, and I thought, wow, this looks just like North Georgia. There's scrub brush, and grainy stuff on the hill, side of a hill, but I immediately realized that anybody I see from now on is not going to be friendly like Georgia. And then when I was captured, a little later on, turns out that they were Chinese, regular Chinese army was down there running the gun sites there. And my first thought was, uh-oh, I'm in real trouble, I'm gonna end up in China. But as it turns out, I was sent back to Hanoi and joined the crowd there.
Okay, tell me about some of the prison camps that you were held in. I know you were held in quite
Several.
many.
Well, the first one was, as mentioned, Waddell. We called, as a nickname, the Hanoi Hilton. And there was a section that we called the New Guy Village. And that's where you went in and met your initial interrogator and got to shakedown. And I learned right quickly that they knew as much about our operation practically as I did. Of course, they had quite a few people got there ahead of me, but they were really up to date on our activities. And the purpose for the first few days was to, if possible, and they were pretty successful in doing it, in breaking you mentally, physically, and emotionally, so you accepted the fact that you were a prisoner now and you were going to take their instructions and follow their orders. I resisted that for a little while till they convinced me that they could make me do whatever they wanted me to do. And getting back from that was a real accomplishment, or learning and growing experience for me. They put me in with a Navy commander, squadron commander, who's in really bad shape. And I thought they put me in there so they'd have somebody to blame when he died. But he showed me such determination to live that it is what really turned me around and allowed me to adjust to the circumstances. We stayed together for a little over 3 months, and then they moved me out to another camp out the edge of town that we called the zoo. It had originally been called a farm, and the buildings were the barn and the stable and the chicken coop and the outhouse and all this sort of stuff. Till one day, one of the guys in the prison reacted. All the doors had little peeps, we call them, a little window that opened up so the guard or whoever could look in and make sure you're there and have you bow and do the things you're supposed to do. Well, this guy mentioned, says the first zoo he'd ever been in where the animals came by and looked at the people. So from then on, it was the zoo. And I was there for 3 years, and then the Vietnamese apparently decided after Ho Chi Minh died and things started improving a bit to put us into compound living, and they developed a regular army post a little further out of Hanoi, and they enclosed compound area, and there were 50 odd of us in this building, and we were just starting to get used to having a little more freedom, being outside, getting sunshine, because up to that time we lived in groups of 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, and you only got out to take a quick bath once a day if you were lucky, and pick up your food twice a day. But as I said, we were just getting accustomed to it out there, and there was a special forces, the U.S. kind of mission called a Sante raid, went into one of the camps where our people had been, but it had already been moved out. But it really scared the Vietnamese because they never considered that the U.S. would try to do something like that 15 miles from downtown Hanoi. And consequently, they packed us all up, moved us back into the big prison downtown, Waddell. And another area in the back where they had been keeping political prisoners and the South Vietnamese prisoners was now belonged to the U.S. prisoners, and we called it Camp Unity because it was the first time we'd gotten all of the prisoners that we knew about in North Vietnam all together in one place. And then when the bombing started again in 1972, about 200 of us won the lottery to go up to a really remote camp right up on the Chinese border. It was so deep in the hills we called it Dog Patch. Unfortunately, we didn't see Daisy or little Abner, but things were pretty grim up there because they didn't have electricity and other things, but we managed that. And then the settlement came up. I was brought back into to Hanoi for release in '73.
Now, you were shot down during an era that they called the torture era. Most people here today grew up during the global war on terror. So we all have our different opinions of, what torture is. So what is your definition of torture? Is it a physical one, a mental one, or is it a combination?
It's a little bit of everything. Physical is by definition where you are bent, beat, twisted, whatever it takes. And to me, it becomes torture when it gets to the point that that's the only thing you can think about. That you just want to get through the next minute or the next second or whatever it is. Mentally, it can get to you as a result of the physical, obviously. But mentally, what I relate, I guess, was when the U.S. wanted to pick up president, dictator, whatever you want to call him, Noriega down in Panama. And they set up all these loudspeakers all around the compound where he was and played all this ridiculous music at full volume to probably drove him batty in there. Emotionally, that varies with the individual. I live with some guys that took things very, very difficultly over there, and things that I realized wasn't much fun, but made me realize that everybody's got a different breaking point in whatever it is, either physical, mentally, or emotionally. And it's not something you can define specifically. It's an individual thing.
You were held almost 6 years, to be exact, 5 years and 8 months. A total of 2,069 consecutive days.
I didn't count the minutes.
What kept you going? What was your motivation?
Well, I alluded back there earlier that I resisted a little bit early in the game till they convinced me that they could make me do it. I had an experience as a result of that. When I came out of it, I really felt like I could hide under a leaf on the ground, or the classic under a snake's belly. But I had an experience during the night that somehow made me realize that whatever happened from now on, I was going to live. And I would leave here. I didn't know when it was going to be, but I'd go. So all I can credit to is the faith that I had growing up that somebody, I don't know whether you want to call him God, Allah, Jehovah, or what, but there is a stronger power in this universe that's there to take care of you when you need it.
Okay. Now, I know personally that you've been back to Vietnam. Tell me why you went back that first initial time.
Well, the first time was kind of twofold. It was with an organization called Friendship Force that's headquartered in Atlanta, and their purpose is set up exchange programs between countries. And Dr. Smith, the founder, had wanted to establish Vietnam, and we had a mutual friend who was a POW and I lived with, and he approached us, would you go back with us if we went? And I first told him, I'll give you a definite maybe. I need to think about it. Well, some of the friends who worked with the government or other things, John McCain, Senator McCain, if you know of him, had been back, and they told us that, you ought to go and see what it's like. And simply put, I decided, I spent 5.5, almost 6 years of my life over there. It caused a breakup in my family. A lot of things in my life were affected by it, and I didn't get to see anything about it except flying over and dropping bombs. I'd like to go back and see what Vietnam really is. So we went to Hanoi for several days, and then we went down to Da Nang and over to Hue, and then to Saigon. And I realized the people over there are just like people everywhere else. They basically want the same things. They hurt when they are imposed or people do things to them. They love just like everybody else. And conveniently, not long after that first trip, the U.S. Recognized them for trade relations. And we had a TV crew from Atlanta on the first trip and recorded it and then put on a special program on the 4th of July that year. And when this trade relation came out, the reporter had been with us, came back out and did an interview with me and asked me what I thought. And I said, well, we spent a better part of 10 years over there trying to get the situation so that the people could make choices for themselves. And it looks like now we're going to give them the opportunity to do that after all this time. And the trips I've made since then were to see the changes that have taken place, and it's almost indescribable. The first time I went, the only thing you saw were bicycles. This was in 1994. And the last time I was over there, I was in the biggest traffic jam I think I've been in since I was in Paris a few years ago. The cars all over the place with motor scooters and you name it. They are making capitalism by a new definition.
So how many times have you been back total?
4.
4? And so I guess my question to you now is, I understand one reason that you continue to go back, but is going back each time part of the healing process?
No, I don't think so. I determined when I was there that this was a part of my life just like everything else I'd done, and I accepted that what was happening to me was just part of my job, and they were doing their job. And the people, as I said a while ago, really were just the victims like people are everywhere when governments decide to do things, whether they want it to happen that way or not. And in this case, I've just been impressed to see the progress that the people over there are making. And as an example, the last time I was there, we did a very similar Hanoi to Saigon and even down to the Delta, but we went up into the highlands on one of the daily trips. And I was impressed. Almost every little shack up there had a satellite dish on it. And the tour guide we had that day made a comment, or somebody asked him a question about where these children go to school, because they were just little bitty children. And he said, well, they're in school right now, but said the ones you see here are the ones not quite ready. And he smiled and he says, we got TV here about 3 years ago.
Okay, so next year marks the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which some view as the beginning of the end of the Vietnam War. What's the one thing that we should all, sitting here, all should know about Vietnam, from your perspective?
Well, I guess the first thing is to be cautious about how you get started in a shooting war, because that one actually started on a false assumption, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And what was going to be just a little training exercise to go over and help the Vietnamese escalated into a full-scale shooting war of over 500,000 United States troops, with 55,000 odd buried as a result, with names on the wall in Washington. There are a lot of evils around this world, and you people are coming into one that has a very uncertain future that's dealing with Islam terrorism. And I don't have good feelings about the way we're dealing with it initially. I hope that we'll get a better handle on it soon. But if and when the situation presents itself, there comes a time when you just have to, as the saying goes, suck it in and be ready and stand up for what you believe in and what your principles are, and to keep this country the home of the free and the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Okay. Now, each Memorial Day that passes, or each time you go and you visit the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., or if you visit any of the traveling Vietnam walls, who comes to mind and why?
Well, for the wall itself, two names come up right quickly of two very good friends of mine, names on that wall. And again, the entire wall itself, what I just said, the sacrifice that was made by 55,000 odd men or women that died as a result. And to put things in perspective, I mentioned that my target was these 2 railroad sightings, rather innocuous. 3 of us were shot down. I was the only one that survived. We went in there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I happened to know, because I was there, the railroad was operating again before 8 o'clock the next morning. So we gave 3 airplanes and 2 people's lives to just interrupt the railroad for a few hours. That's the thing that comes to mind. What a waste. And that's why I said, if you're going to go to war, do it for the right reason and do it to win.
Okay. About a year ago, you approached me about your wishes to be buried at Andersonville National Cemetery. Now, there's a common misconception that Andersonville is just a Civil War site, but you and I both know it's so much more complex than that. We're home of the only National Prisoner of War Museum in the United States, and we are an active national cemetery. Good advertising. You know, everybody's heard of Arlington National Cemetery, and since, you know, you are a retiree, former prisoner of war, with all your medals, you would definitely qualify to be buried at Arlington. So I guess, watch his eyes, watch his Andersonville.
Well, I'll be absolutely candid. My son was living in Northern Virginia, and my daughter lives up in Gainesville. And people would ask me, where you want to be buried? And I said, do what's easy and convenient for everybody at the time. I'd like Arlington or I'd like Andersonville. And my son retired disability a few years ago, and he lives down here now. And this episode, when Arlington came up and determined that they weren't sure who was in this site and where the names were, I decided Kim's got a better deal.
Yes, thank you for that. My track record's a little bit better than theirs. Yeah, so, well, today I want to be the one to tell you thank you for your service. And I would ask everyone here to please join me in welcoming home Colonel Wayne Waddell.
I want to make one quick comment. I meant to do it earlier and I didn't find the time going through. There was a mention a while ago about recognizing a hero here today. I'm not the hero here today. The heroes are those 55,000 names up there on the wall that didn't come home. I'm a survivor. Thank you very much.